Thanks for joining me. I'm Izzy at Minerva. In today's video, we're looking at how to create a frilled collar. So this is going to be a really lovely little detail, very elegant, very romantic sort of collar, and works really well with floppy fabrics or drapey fabrics like tencel or lawn cotton, something with a bit of drape, so that it can hold those lovely sort of layers of frill around the collar. As ever with this series, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me here. And also you're going to need your own bespoke body block. I will be demonstrating in this video today using my own personal body block, and yours is going to look completely different to mine, and that's totally normal. For the purpose of this video, we have got the front bodice combined waist dart, which is where we've moved the dart from the shoulder and just rotated it round to the waist. If you're not sure how to do that, you can refer back to video 45. As ever with this series, we're just looking at how to construct one aspect of your top, and in today's video it's going to be the collar. So we're not adding sleeves, we're not adding seam allowances to the sleeves, we're not doing all this sort of details, and that's up to you to kind of pick and choose which design aspects from this series you want to put together to create your own gorgeous bespoke block. Alright, let's get straight on into it. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is just to draw in where we want our neckline to go. So just find a curve that you like. Don't forget to use a nice sharp pencil while you're doing this. Obviously, I am using a fat marker pen, so you can see it on the screen above. So because we've got a nice low neckline at this point, we just need to add in a 6mm dart from the apex up to the neckline, just so that the fabric sits nice and smooth across our bust at that point. So because it's going in at that point, isn't it, towards the centre. If you want further details on that, you can always refer back to video 59, where we talk about how to construct a low neckline with a flat collar. The principles are going to be very similar for this video too. First of all, I just want you to find the centre of the waist dart and mark a point where that is. Next, draw a line from that point to the apex. Then draw a line from the apex to the neckline. Mark a point 6mm away from the end of the neckline dart, and then join that point up to the apex. So you've created a nice little dart that is 6mm wide. Next, cut out the neckline. Cut out the neckline dart and cut along the centre of the waist dart, leaving a pivot point at the apex. Excellent, so remove the volume from the neck dart and then just close up that dart so that the waistline dart increases in size. At this point you may just want to curve off and soften that curve of the neckline and just cut it out accordingly. What we're going to do next is just to work along the shoulder up here. So take your ruler down to the shoulder point by the arm side and mark a point 2cm offset from the shoulder seam. Next, take your back bodice and locate the shoulder seam of the back bodice nicely up here by the neckline, and then pivot it so that the other end is going to sit, rather than sitting straight on the neck seam like that, we want it to pivot to meet that 2cm point. So basically the back is overlapping the front by 2cm at the shoulder point. Perfect. Let's draw in our collar shape now. Obviously you can pick and choose the collar shape that you want. It really doesn't matter what shape you pick, but I'll just give you a demo of one example now. I'm going to draft my collar at 7cm wide, so I'm just going to offset a series of points around the neckline, 7cm offset from the neckline. Now at this point I can decide how I want my frill to be. It could be that we just continue 7cm all the way down and have a bit of a point to the end of the frill, or we could try and integrate it into the point of the neck at this point, for lack of a better word. I think we'll just bring it into this point here nice and neatly. We've not done that before. So let's take a look at how we could do that and find a nice kind of curve that respects that shape. So feel free just to kind of dot something on freehand, or just use your pattern drafting ruler to find a nice curve to create a nice collar shape. Great, at this point we're just going to trace over that collar pattern piece so that we can start to manipulate it and add the volume that we need to without changing the basic block of the bodice that we've already sort of developed and manipulated already. So grab a nice sharp pencil and trace over your collar. It might be really helpful just to add a little reference point here, like a little notch, to note that that's where the collar is going to attach onto the shoulder seam. Great, so let's cut around this pattern piece now so that we've just got the shape we want to work with. Grab your tape measure and just measure along the inside of the collar, so the neckline, and just take that measurement by walking the tape measure along the neckline. Tap that length into your calculator and divide it by 7. I'm now going to divide the neckline into 7 equal segments using that number that I've just got on my calculator now. So for me, I'm going to mark points at 4.7 all the way around the neckline. Grab your pattern drafting ruler and just extend those lines to the style line or the edge of your collar. Try and get it as sort of perpendicular to the neckline as you can as you draw them out. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just measure the distance of the smallest line, which for me is about 2 centimeters. And I'm just going to mark a point along each of these cut lines at 2 centimeters. I'm just going to flip that pattern piece around, and then I'm going to cut along each of these lines, leaving a tiny little pivot point where the neckline is. This is the inner bit of the neckline here, and this is the style line on the outside. It's very delicate work, this. Okay, now that we've cut along those lines, we've got some nice kind of pivot points to reference. I'm just going to use some sellotape and just stick down one of the middle ones down onto the paper down here. And then basically what we want to do is to create this neckline and bring it into a really nice curve. So it forms basically like a complete circle. So something a little bit like that. Now the only thing we want to be mindful of as we create this curve is that we allow at least 3 centimeters between this corner here and that one there. And that's simply because we need to add our seam allowances to the pattern piece once we've drafted it out. The next little thing we want to do is make sure that all the gaps in between are there or thereabouts sort of even. We don't want one that's really narrow and one that's really wide. And that's why we've done this 2 centimeter offset, so that we can just check the distance as we expand them all. Okay, so I'm just going to extend out these little collars by 1.5 centimeters at the 2 centimeter mark. So the distance between those 2 points is going to be 1.5 centimeters. As I move on to my next one, I'm just moving that around so that it hits the 1.5 centimeter distance at that point. And what that means is that the angle of increase is going to be consistent all the way around the collar. So this is a bit of a lopsided circle, but that's okay. We know that the amount that we've increased the volume by around the whole of the collar is correct. Grab some tracing paper, pop that over your block of your collar, and let's create our pattern piece now. Starting off with the centre back, we're going to create the seam allowance at that point. Draw in your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance all the way around the curve of the style line of the collar, and then allow your 1.5 centimeter seam allowance to the inside of the neckline. Just drawing that line now to creating a nice smooth curve around. Annotate where your notch is, so you extend that out. It's our notch. Now our grain line is going to follow the centre back for this pattern piece. This is our frilled collar and it's our collar pattern piece, and we're going to cut 2 on the fold. Now for this pattern piece, I am not going to create a narrower undercollar pattern piece, which we've done in previous videos. The reason for that is because it's so drapey and so kind of like swishy. It's not going to really make a big significant difference in terms of it sitting flat, because it's not going to sit flat. It's not designed to sit flat, it's designed to be a lovely frill. So let's just make this really simple and just create one pattern piece for our collar this time round. So when we look at the block that we worked and took our collar off, you'll notice that the back bodice has not changed at all. The front one obviously has, it's got a different neckline, and we've widened up the dart at the bottom. The only change we need to do to our back bodice pattern piece is very simply just to add our facing. So offset a series of little points around the back neckline at 5 centimeter offset. Trace over your back pattern piece, adding your seam allowances as you need to, making sure that you annotate the pattern piece to say it will be placed on the fold along the centre back. Frilled collar, back bodice, cut 1 on fold. Excellent, then just pick up your tracing paper and we will then do the pattern piece for our back facing. So for the back facing, we've just cut 1, we will just cut 1 on the fold, and we've added our seam allowance to our neckline as we did with the back pattern piece, so that all of that can attach really nicely onto our collar. Moving on now to the front bodice pattern piece, let's create our pattern from this. Okay, so we're going to just create our button placket now, and we're going to offset from the centre front just 1.5 centimetres, slightly narrower than what we've done in the past, and just square that off. Then just use your expanding sewing gauge to figure out where you want your buttons at 3 nice equidistant locations along the centre front, and mark that on your pattern piece. As with all collars, we are going to create our facing. So let's do that now. In a slightly different pen colour, we are going to just assume about a 5 centimetre facing line all the way around the pattern neckline. And likewise, when we hit the bottom down here, we want to create a nice 5 centimetre even distribution. Trace over your pattern piece, allowing seam allowances to the sections where they're going to join together with another pattern piece. Add your seam allowance to your neckline as well. Now at this point, our dart has increased at the bottom, but it's not, our dart lines are still the ones we want to follow, but we just want to make sure that we are offsetting the point of our dart 2 centimetres from the apex. So we're going to be offsetting it at this point here. So follow your dart legs up to that point to create your new dart. Add a little annotation or a little notch at the neckline where the centre front line is, and just annotate where your buttons should be going, and consequently where your buttonholes will be going too. Grain line follows the centre front. Frilled collar, bodice front, cut 2. Okay, next we're just going to trace around our facing to create our facing pattern piece. So just follow that green line, which is the 5 centimetre offset. We will be attaching the facing to the back facing pattern piece. So add your seam allowance to the top shoulder. And to the inside of the neckline here, also add your seam allowance because that is going to be attaching to both the collar and the front bodice. Frilled collar, front facing, cut 2. Brilliant. So we've done all of that now. Let us cut out our tracing paper, and then we're going to cut out our fabric, our calico, making sure to annotate all of our pattern pieces accordingly. So add your dart lines and your notches as well. Great. Come back and join me to sew it up and to see what it looks like once you've done all of that. We'll start off just by preparing our front and our back and sewing up the darts. If you're not sure how to do this, you can just refer back to video 22 where I talk you through how to sew up darts in lots of detail. So pin your darts nice and accurately and then sew them in the method shown in video 22. Now that we've sewn the darts, we're just going to put the right sides together of the garment, and we're just going to line them up at the shoulder points only. So pin across the seams up at the shoulders up here, and then we're going to sew them in place. Once you've done that, you can just press those seams open. Brilliant. So the next pattern pieces we're going to look at are the front facing and the back facing. Effectively, what we're trying to do is just create a nice big circle here. So with right sides together, we're just going to pin the seam allowances in place. Now we are expecting the seam allowances to match up. I'm okay with them not quite overlapping here because I'm expecting them to match up at the 1.5 centimetre seam allowance line. So as long as it's matching up across there, that's fine for the sake of just pattern drafting, getting things in place. So this is right sides together. We're just pinning the back facing onto the front facing at the shoulder seam. Once you pin them in place, then just sew them together. So then all you need to do is just to press those seam allowances open as well. Now with our collar pattern piece, the first thing that we want to do is, for both pattern pieces, we just want to sew down this centre back seam and just sew the collar together. So we've got two pattern pieces here, and on the inside, that is the right side, so we're just going to sew a line of stitches across here. Once you've done that, you can then press that seam open. Repeat that process now for the other pattern piece of the frilled collar, which will be the under collar. Okay, great. So we've got two collar pattern pieces. What we now want to do is just to sew them right sides together around the style line, which is the outside. So start off just by lining up the centre back seams really nicely and neatly and just pinning those in place. And once you pin that style line together, it's time to then just go and sew that in place. At this point, we've got quite a wide and generous seam allowance here. So I'd suggest that we trim down one side in half so the seam allowance is half the width of the other. Next, we're just going to snip all the way around the seam allowance, perpendicular to the seam line, just to take that tension out when we turn it out the right way out. It looks like a little castle now, doesn't it? A castle turrets all the way around. Okay, so turn that the right way out now. Okay, and once you've turned it right way facing out, then just iron it, making sure that it's sitting really nice and flat and the curve of the collar is just really beautifully stitched together. Let's go and do that now. Lovely. Okay, so once we've done that, we've got our collar, we've got our bodice with the neckline here, and we're just very simply going to baste in place the collar to the neckline. The right side of our bodice is facing up on the screen and the top of the collar is also facing up. So pin that in place, making sure that you line up your notches with your shoulder seams. Once you've got your back of your neck pinned in place, that's fantastic. Now the curve of this means that we've lost a lot of kind of length along the curve of the collar here. So effectively what we want to be doing is making sure to start off with that we've got the point of the collar in the correct place on the bodice down here. Now the point of the collar needs to extend 1.5 centimetres across from that notch, simply because that's the way we drafted it. We want the collar just to sit really nicely up against that notch. So pin that in place. The collar depth at that point should be 1.5 centimetres, so it should just seamlessly tie into the centre front. And what you'll notice, as with mine, we've got a lot of extra fabric underneath and we're going to need to ease that in. Now, it is a little bit tricky to do this because of the tightness of the curve. So what I would suggest is you may just want to snip out some of the tension before you pin it in place. Okay, so we've now got that collar pinned in. You can already see the frill is looking really dramatic. My first row of basting stitches is going to be around 1.2 centimetres offset from the raw edge. Okay, so we've sewn that all the way around, and this is the underside we're looking at. So you can see it's not gathered anywhere, it's all just offset about 1.2 centimetres from the raw edge. And if we flip it over and just check it on this side too, everything looks like it's all fine, which is good. Now that we've basted that in place, you may just want to snip out all of the corners and just grade the seam allowance down so that you've got less bulk in that area. Wonderful. Once you've got all of that prepped up and ready to go, we're just going to put the facing right side down on top of the pattern piece, matching up the notches and pinning it in place. Don't forget, if you're doing your final pattern piece and this is your final garment rather than just a toile, you're going to want to finish the inside of the facing line so that you've not got a raw edge there, and you can do that using an overlocker. You could fold it under, you could add a bias binding strip, so many different ways that you could finish that facing edge. Great, sew that in place using your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way around. Wonderful. Okay, so grab your scissors and just snip the corners. And then let's just turn the facing to the inside, creating a nice sharp corner up at the point up here. Then just go and press the facing so it sits nice and flat to the inside of the garment. Brilliant. Now with the right sides together, we're going to flip the back over the front and we are just going to pin these side seams in place. Sew the two side seams using a 1.5cm seam allowance. Press those seams open and then let's go and try it on. So here we go, this is our beautiful frilled collar. You can see it's just draping really nicely over the front, and all that volume that we added in has just created a really gorgeous, romantic aesthetic. It's been really fun to look at that collar detail. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Please do leave your comments below if you've got any questions or queries. We always love to hear from our maker community. Don't forget you can create your free Minerva account on our website to upload photos of your latest makes and also to follow along with our pattern drafting series. So thank you for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva and I will see you next week for our final instalment of our collar series.